For the 20th anniversary of the Monster Hunter series, Capcom conducted a worldwide survey known as the Hunter's Choice, in order to find out which monster was the most popular. People could vote for anyone, and after it was all over, all the monsters across the past 20 years were ranked from most to least popular. This was quite significant, as in the past, these kinds of surveys were generally Japan only, and the Hunter's Choice was conducted during a time where the series was bigger and more popular than ever. The results were predictable, surprising, and at times a bit grim. Which brings us to today's topic. I am going to talk about the least popular Elder Dragons of all time, Monster Hunter Rise's Wind Serpent Ibushi and Thunder Serpent Narwa. These dragons were introduced in the latter half of the game. Ibushi is a pale blue serpent with the power to control the winds and is the primary instigator of the game's main conflict, while Thunder Serpent Narwa is yellow, has the power to create and control lightning, and is the final boss of the game. Today we're going to take a close look at the Storm Serpents. Who are they? What are they capable of? What kind of work went into their development, and why did they rank so low on the list? Ibushi is first witnessed by the main cast of Rise following a particularly vicious rampage led by Apex Azoras. He's seen nearby, flying through the sky, and sometime later he launches an assault on Komura Village's stronghold. As such, the first official encounter with Ibushi is in a rampage, as the final assault. While the weather is normally calm during rampages, this one has the wind howling, as if a hurricane is occurring. When Ibushi appears, the first thing he does is devastate the nearby installations with dragon projectiles before moving onto the gate, which he destroys in a single blow. This contrasts heavily with the previous foes of the Rampage, where the gate was able to withstand them somewhat, establishing the Wind Serpent as the most serious threat he faced. Ibushi is a monster that constantly floats, propelled by a special gas within his organs. He attacks by biting you while moving forwards, and by using his tail. As you saw earlier, he can smash it down, but also swing it around and backflip with it. Ibushi has wind sacs all over his body, on his arms, back, and tail, which itself is quite large and can be inflated further, allowing him to use it like a hammer. Ibushi can also strike down with his arms, dash across the arena, and fire a laser that he can sweep around. The wind sacs augment his attacks in different ways. He can imbue his arm and tail attacks with dragon energy, or even directly launch the Dragon Balls of Wind using them, and of course fire them from his mouth. Another interesting trait of his physical attacks that aim at the ground is that they cause wind geysers to shoot upwards. They send up a type of gas that's extremely light, so it causes you to be sent upwards if you walk into them, seemingly to your benefit, as you don't take damage from them and can dodge away. This helps to avoid some of Ibushi's more dangerous attacks, such as his laser. Ibushi's attacks launch you into the air and leave you in such a state where you can only break free with a wire fall. If you have no bugs left, then you may fall victim to a follow-up attack, which more often than not will also relaunch you into the air, meaning that Ibushi can effectively juggle you until you die. Ibushi wants to breach the stronghold, and so he'll target the gate with a special attack where he creates a maelstrom of wind around him, with several rocks floating in the air. Soon enough, he launches them at the gate, with each blow dealing massive damage to it. However, by making use of the installations, you can shoot and destroy each rock, which deals damage to Ibushi, and dealing enough will have him fall to the ground. In fact, this happens if you knock him out as well. He will just fall flat on his belly and remain there for a time, allowing you to smack any part of him, including his tail, which can be severed. Eventually Ibushi will be repelled, which is a victory no matter which way you slice it. All other Ibushi rampages you can take on also end in him being repelled. At the end of Hunter Rank 7, you encounter Thunder Serpent Narwa, the final boss of Rise. Narwa bears similarities to Ibushi, but visually she's a very different monster, with small tentacles that run across her back, arms and tail, which itself splits into two giant spikes. Her head is wider and has two horns, although she has the same double jaw as Ibushi. Narwa also has purple thunder sacs on various parts of her body and a massive yellow one on her belly. You fight her exclusively in the Coral Palace, a special arena on an isolated island next to a long abandoned fortress. No rampages this time, it's a straightforward arena fight. As her name implies, Thunder Serpent Narwa uses thunder element entirely, which is coloured yellow, similar to Raijin, although some attacks are a much stronger purple. Narwa can attack in ways similar to Ibushi, such as by biting and dashing across the arena. But having thunder instead of wind grants her many more tricks up her sleeve, including a downwards laser that she can aim forwards. The same way Ibushi could send out dragon projectiles, so can Narwa, with thunder balls and also rings that expand outwards as they travel. She can send them from her arms, mouth and tail. Many other attacks involve thunder rings too. Sometimes she'll rest her arms on the ground and create 3 giant rings above her. This is a perfect opportunity to strike, but soon the rings will sink into the ground and hurt anyone standing under them. Ibushi would send out wind geysers, but Narwa's thunder causes rocks to levitate and act as platforms for you to climb on. This leads to rock platforms being created whenever she performs certain attacks, which leads to interesting gameplay. as they'll often have long buried but still functioning hunting installations as seen in a Rampage. The platforms are used in a variety of ways. For example, Narwa can do Ibushi's tail hammer slam, but when she brings it down, two platforms rise, one that her tail rests on and another above it, where her very vulnerable belly sack happens to be. Assuming you evaded the attack, you can choose to climb on either platform and attack the targets there. This also applies to Narwa's other attacks, such as when she rests both arms on the ground and releases a giant horizontal thunder ring. 4 platforms rise that allow you to evade the attack, and one happens to be right next to her belly again, meaning that if you can think fast, you have access to another weak point. She can launch homing purple thunder blasts from her tail, and 2 platforms rise that you can use to intercept them. Narwa can also send out thunder beams directly from her belly, but there's gaps in between for you to evade. Thunder Serpent Narwa has multiple phases to her fight, and she'll get stronger in each one. New phases are marked when she travels to the centre of the arena to perform an attack where she sends out thunderbolts and rings. If you're quick enough, you can blast her with the installations for free damage. Following this, many of her attacks will send out thunderbolts in addition to the rings, creating danger especially for those using installations. She can send out those purple beams below her while hovering, and send out a thunder ring that transforms into a ball. If you successfully knock Narwa down, she falls differently to Ibushi in that she'll lie on her back and 2 platforms will rise on her sides, allowing easy access to that vulnerable belly. It's worth mentioning that Narwa can be fought in multiplayer, so this conveniently provides weak points for everyone to attack if they so please. Head, arms, belly and tail, the last of which again can be severed, although it's just a singular spike and not the whole thing. Narwa's second transition attack has a charge up, with 4 cannons available on different platforms. Wait too long, and she unleashes a devastating thunder laser and sweeps it around in a spiral that targets the platforms, before releasing a supernova onto the ground. You can of course interrupt this, and some of the ways you can do this include firing a Dragonator that somehow reaches into the centre of the arena, or firing a spitting wyvern shot. Phase 3 Narwa glows more purple and gets new attacks. She can sweep a laser that can be avoided by standing behind rocks, charge up a huge thunderball with multiple rings emerging, and create several delayed explosions on the ground that spread out in a fork shape. Her dash attack now also sends out thunder rings, and her multi-purple laser strike is doubled up. The aerial version now sends out thunder rings as well. She can also send out a huge thunderball that remains on the ground, and her previous ground lightning ring attack now sends out more bolts and more rings. Not only that, but she sends out even more rings from her hand. Basically every single one of her attacks has been enhanced, making her much more dangerous. In her HR7 quest, Serpents Goddess of Thunder, the fight ends with Narwa accidentally ramming into her floating platforms and then landing on the Coral Palace ground so hard that she falls into it, resulting in the victory. But it ends up being pretty short-lived, as Narwa later escapes, leaving both her and Ibushi at large. Eventually, both of them manage to unite at the Coral Palace, leading to a fateful encounter. A new quest is unlocked at Hunter rank 50, known as the Allmother, and it lists both Wind Serpent Ibushi and Thunder Serpent Narwa as targets you need to slay once and for all. Upon arriving at the palace, the atmosphere is completely different. The sky is overcast and the wind is howling. This time, Ibushi is present. His moveset is virtually identical to how it was during the Rampage, except he's targeting you instead of the red stronghold gate. This means that his ultimate attack now has him send all the rocks directly at you. Another difference is that Ibushi's wind geysers can lift up the Coral Palace rocks similar to what Narwa could do. Ibushi appears to still be recovering from the wounds he received at the Red Stronghold, which causes him to be defeated pretty fast and once again fall down the same hole Narwa did. This time you follow him, revealing a beautifully lit cabin where Narwa is present. This is where she is to lay her eggs, and we've now interrupted her. Ibushi is too weak, barely able to fly, and all of a sudden Narwa attacks and drains him of his energy, killing him. As his body falls to the ground, Thunder Serpent Narwa transforms into Narwa the Allmother, a variant of the Elder Dragon and Monster Hunter Rise's true final boss. Narwa the Allmother completely glows purple, and she now has wind sacs on her arms. In her belly, there are several visible eggs that she was intending to lay, that would one day hatch into more Storm Serpents, continuing the rampages forever. So this has to end here and now. The Allmother has most of Ibushi's and Narwa's attacks, but performs them faster and augments them. For example, she slams her arm down like Ibushi, but this now creates a fork of lightning bolts, which she can also release by tapping the ground. Many of her slam attacks will make you hard knocked down onto the ground, leaving you vulnerable to follow up thunderbolts if you don't wirefall away too. Because she has wind sacs now, she can create wind geysers, which conveniently raise you onto stone platforms with more installations. However, the platforms are not really a big part of the Allmother's fight. It's much more of a back and forth between 2 powerful combatants. This plays to Allmother's strengths, as having all these attacks with little to no downtime makes her one of the most dangerous monsters in Rise. Narwa the Allmother also has phase transitions, where she travels to the centre of the arena and releases several Thunder Rings, and this chains into her most infamous attack, where she raises several Dragonators from the ground and has them rotate around her while she charges up a supernova. The Dragonators move both clockwise and counterclockwise and do massive damage, making them dangerous. You also get sucked in towards the centre, where a huge ball of lightning is on the ground. Once it disappears, you can reach the middle and attack the Allmother, and dealing enough damage will cancel the supernova. Fail to do so, and she'll rise to the top of the cavern and obliterate the ground, which can be avoided by standing on nearby floating platforms. Following this, the Allmother gets stronger and gains access to her second most infamous attack, a triple combo where she rushes at you with 2 bites before unleashing a Thunderball. All 3 attacks heavily track you and can be tricky to avoid. She also does her tail slam much faster than before, and chains it from other attacks. She can add another ring to Narwa's old downwards ring strike, which now sucks you in. Not just this, but her Thunder Rings now casually rotate, which makes them much trickier to avoid. The halfway point in the fight is marked by Magnamalo showing up. As it turns out, a ton of nearby monsters sensed Allmother's growing power and were drawn to her. Magnamalo is guaranteed to show up the first time, but Teostra or Koshaladeora can also make an appearance. They'll try and attack the Allmother, but fail and become Wyvern rideable, allowing you to pilot them to deal massive damage. Successfully getting a mounted Punisher changes the music to Rise's Proof of a Hero, which plays for the remainder of the fight as Allmother enters their second phase, once again summoning more Dragonators. Now her eyes will turn red, and she'll start releasing wind and thunder explosions in V-shapes, either independently or while releasing horizontal rings. Her triple combo is faster and will have her release an additional ring too. Her attacks overall raise in intensity, become faster, and she chains them more often too. This is the hardest part of the fight, but eventually you can kill her, ending the threat of the Storm Serpents once and for all. Her eggs are destroyed as she dies, so that threat is gone too. It's finally over. It's worth mentioning that later on, event quests were released for all 3 Serpents that gave them more health and attack power. Ibushi got a Rampage quest, as well as a solo one in the Coral Palace, and it's possible to kill him in both of them. Narwa also has a solo quest, and she too will die normally. Narwa the Allmother's event quest goes the same as the original version, but this time the quest itself doesn't disguise her presence, making it very clear that you won't actually be facing the normal Narwa. In Sunbreak, when Serpent Ibushi is encountered at Master Rank 20 in a solo slaying quest at the Coral Palace. Rampages are not in the expansion, but the characters do mention that Ibushi caused one that I had to deal with off screen. Ibushi doesn't have many differences, except for an attack where he tries to land on top of you belly first. Ibushi can also do Allmother's triple combo, although this time slower and imbued with dragon elements. At Master Rank 30, a quest to slay Narwa the Allmother is unlocked. Ibushi is not present at all, and Thunder Serpent Narwa doesn't appear either. She just begins the fight as the Allmother. In Master Rank, she can stick her tail into the ground to release thunder explosions in front of her, and belly flop like Ibushi, and this time, release thunder and wind explosions afterwards. The nuke attack now sends out extra rings to catch people on the platforms, meaning they have to move off as soon as possible. For the first time, Malzeno will also show up at the halfway point, in addition to the previous monsters. Ibushi is a fight where you largely have to stop him from breaching the stronghold gates and use everything at your disposal. His attention is largely focused on the stronghold gate, which on the surface makes him feel less dangerous, but he's still rather panic inducing due to how much damage he deals to it. His juggling abilities can actually make him quite dangerous if he gets caught in a combo, which means underestimating him can kill you. The first encounter against him genuinely feels really difficult and climactic because of all this, but despite having a wide reach and being capable of a great many things, his attack rate isn't so high. He's still a mid-tier monster in terms of difficulty, and once you get better gear, he goes down rather easily. Narwa on the other hand is more in line with other Monster Hunter final bosses. She's more of a traditional fight, but makes use of many of Rise's unique mechanics, in this case the wire bugs and new hunting installations. The elevated platforms add another angle to the whole thing, by allowing you to strike from elevated positions, evade attacks, and make use of installations. The fight becomes a bit of a bullet hell too, with all the thunder rings and bolts everywhere. It's often a challenge maneuvering around the attacks, but you're rewarded once you reach her, as all her moves leave critical weak points in striking range. The Allmother dials everything up. With no rampage and less of a reliance on special gimmicks, she's much more straightforward and also much more dangerous thanks to her more intense attacks, which she performs faster and closer together. Because of how fast some of her attacks come out, you really have to be careful. as you'll often be hit before you know what's even happening. She's genuinely very tough for this reason, and gets more and more difficult as the fight goes on. Like Narwa, her attacks all have clear openings, which makes her moveset satisfying to learn. But there are a couple of controversial ones. Some people don't like her Dragonator attack because of how damaging it is and how hard it can be to avoid them. And I myself struggle greatly with the double bite combo. It's so fast and tracks you to an insane degree. Dodging it is a genuine challenge, and I still haven't figured out the proper way. Even though Ibushi is available to face in a normal quest, he's still mildly challenging, which means the Serpents can comfortably be split into 3 different difficulty tiers, Ibushi being the easiest and the Allmother being the hardest. Ibushi's armour has elements of the Wind Serpent featured all over, such as his front-facing horn being on the fierce-looking helmet. The most notable aspect of the armour has got to be whatever is happening on the shoulders. There's a giant inflatable resting there that sort of floats like a balloon. At first I thought this was supposed to be something of a floating shawl, which is depicted on a lot of Eastern holy figures. Amatsu's armour has one, and I myself was reminded of Ace Attorney Spirit of Justice's Prosecutor Sadmati. Wind Serpent Ibushi was inspired by Fujin, the Shinto god of wind. Fujin is often depicted holding a giant bag of wind on his shoulders, which as you can see is recreated on the armour. The chest has a yellow samurai knot, which is also featured on the waist where it trails down behind him. The arms have Ibushi's wind sacs, and there's pink portions all over to reflect Ibushi's colorations. The female armour is similar, except it's more exposed in various spots, including the helmet, which shows the face. Narwa's armour for the males also has a fierce-looking face, but this time with twin horns. Her tentacles are incorporated into the design and sort of look like jelly. Narwa's armour has something similar to Ibushi's wind bag. Here it's similar to the floating shawl we saw on Nayuta Sadmati as well as Amatsu's armour, but it's thinner and made up of the jelly-like tentacles. And resting on the tentacle is a curious looking ornament. While Ibushi was inspired by the Shinto god of wind, Fujin, Narwa is inspired by the lightning god Raijin, and Raijin is often depicted with something just like this resting on his shoulders. They're drums, designed to play thunder sounds when struck. You can also see jaws on various parts of the armour that kind of resemble eyes, and there's thunder sacs on the arm. The female armour is mostly the same, except more exposed and with thunder sacs on the legs. The Sunbreak armour sets known as Ibushi Pure and Narwa Pure have different designs. The male Ibushi Pure set now has an exposed face. The stole is much less inflated and goes so far down that it trails behind him. He has bigger sleeves and what I believe are Hakama trousers. The female armour is virtually 1-to-1, although it has a slightly different helmet and leggings. The Narwa Pure armour is very similar to the Ibushi Pure, although the shawl has sharp edges. This is also true of the female design, which is again 1-to-1. Personally, I think these look vastly better than the high rank sets. While I understand why the wind bag was present, it was rather distracting due to its size and how it flopped around during combat. I'm also not a fan of the female armours being unnecessarily exposed, which I'm not morally opposed to or anything, but it just doesn't look good here. The pure sets look so much better. Functionally, the high rank sets for both Serpents seem rather useless. They give you a wide variety of level 1 skills, but offer no slots to potentially max them out. Both sets have the skills Constitution, Guard and Evade window. Ibushi's provides Focus, Evade Extender, Flinch Free, Stamina Surge, Power Prolonger, Slugger and Guard Up. Narwa's set provides Offensive Guard, Rapid Morph, Critical Draw, Part Breaker, Artillery and Marathon Runner. Across both sets, these are skills based around stamina management, guarding, evasion and more, generally covering a lot of different weapons, making them a somewhat poor jack of all trades. There's also set exclusive skills called Wind and Thunder Alignment. Wind alignment is on Ibushi's armour and raises dragon resistance, while Thunder alignment is on Narwa's and raises thunder resistance, and at level 5 they both grant the skill Good Luck, which increases quest rewards. A nice bonus, but not so good enough to consider using either of these sets. However, after defeating Narwa the Allmother, you are able to upgrade Thunder Serpent Narwa and Wind Serpent Ibushi's armour using her materials, and this unlocks an exclusive skill called Storm Soul, which has 5 total levels. Each piece of the Narwa and Ibushi equipment has 1 level. The first 3 levels merely buff thunder and dragon attack, but 4 and 5 do something very interesting. They increase the levels of the other armor skills by 1, meaning 5 levels of Storm Soul raises every other level 1 skill in the armor to level 3 instead. Despite it not applying to talisman skills, Storm Soul effectively changes everything. Most of the skills on the Serpent armors are capped at 3 anyway, so Storm Soul effectively maxes them out. The only exceptions are Constitution, Evade Window and Guard, which are found on multiple pieces, so they're easy to max out. This alone makes the armors very good, but there's another angle to all of this, mixing and matching. Remember, each piece has one level of Storm Soul, so no matter which piece of Narwa or Ibushi armor you choose to wear, as long as you're wearing them exclusively, you'll have maxed Storm Soul and one maxed alignment skill, granting you good luck. So this means you can freely change pieces between Narwa and Ibushi to get your ideal set, which can result in several comfy options for weapons such as the dual swords, where you can have all the necessary stamina and evasion skills, Lance, where you can have evasion, stamina and both guard skills, or Switch Axe, where rapid morph is an option too. None of these sets are among the most powerful for the different weapon types, but they're certainly effective, and it's nice to have such versatile sets that are capable of so much. The Narwa and Ibushi pure sets in Sunbreak have Storm Soul built in from the beginning, but there aren't any new additional skills added to the set, so they're virtually identical to how they were in Rise. There are now 5 level 2 decoration slots, but new skills aren't affected by Storm Soul. Narwa and Ibushi have all 14 weapons covered, each with a unique design. Ibushi's weapons are interesting, as they often resemble the ends of his horns, with jagged edges and darkened blades, such as the Greatsword or Switch Axe. Ibushi's body is covered in spikes, which can also be seen on various weapons such as the longsword, where they cover its entire length, or the shields of the Sword and Shield and Lance. They cover the dual swords in their entirety as well, and are on both pieces of the charge blade. Some of the weapons feature Ibushi's wind sacs too, such as the insect glaive where they're on the tail end, as well as the charge blade shield and the base of the lance. In fact, some of the weapons, just like Ibushi's chest armor, look downright inflatable, such as the shield of the Sword and Shield, but also the light bowgun and hunting horn, which itself plays a portion of Ibushi's battle theme. The hammer has Ibushi's claws on the business end, and on the back features a lotus flower that opens up when fully charged, sort of resembling an eye. The gun lance also features the claws at the end of the barrel. All of Ibushi's weapons feature at least one golden emblem that sort of resembles an eye, and they all make swooshing noises as you swing them. Narwa's weapons on the other hand have a few very persistent motifs, a glowing purple emblem, jagged edges that resemble lightning bolts, and blades that split into two. For example, the Greatsword. Look, it splits into two, doubling up entirely. You can see the eye-like emblem on the side, and there's also the jelly-like tentacles in between the two blades. The longsword is similar too, jagged and splits down the middle, as does the bow, switch axe, lance, insect glaive, and heavy bowgun. This could be inspired by Narwa's two horns, but it's also likely to be her tail, which also splits into two giant spikes. The weapons don't always split at the base though. For example, the sword of the Sword and Shield, dual swords and charge blade shield split at the end of the blade instead. There's also another motif, where her weapons will be covered in spikes and will glow underneath, for example the gun lance, but also the sword of the charge blade. The hammer is similar to Ibushi's, where there's claw-like spikes on the business end, and on the other half is jelly that opens up when fully charged. Do you recall the Raijin drums? It's also present on the shield of the Sword and Shield, as well as the light bowgun. Then there's the hunting horn, which features a giant version of the emblem as a drum, surrounded by tentacles and decorated with horn-like spikes. This one plays Narwa's theme. The Allmother has no exclusive weapons or armor, but all her materials are used for the later upgrades of Ibushi and Narwa's gear, so she's still necessary to fight in order to make the most of them. We also cannot forget the Palico or Palamute armors. The Ibushi Palico armor has a little kitty cat sat on top of a floating cloud, since I guess Ibushi himself never travels on the ground. It has the giant wind bag, and a helmet featuring fins, wind sacs, and a front-facing horn. The weapon is an axe that features the emblem, as well as Ibushi's spikes and horn. Meanwhile, the Narwa Palico armor also rests on a cloud. Raijin's drums rest on her shoulders, and the helmet has two horns, as well as jelly styled to resemble Super Saiyan Goku's hairstyle. Her weapon is essentially a mini version of the hunting horn. Lightning appears to be striking within the thundercloud. Canine Ibushi is a fierce-looking beast, its face resembling a snarling demon with a singular horn and wind sacs that form a mane. More wind sacs can be seen on his legs and tail, and his weapon resembles Ibushi's greatsword. Canine Narwa follows a similar motif, except she has two horns, and the jelly-like tentacles spike up like powered-up hair. Her tail is also made of tentacles, and her weapon is a spiky-looking Vajra that resembles the gun lance. Ibushi and Narwa were designed to essentially be flying seahorses, and this is reflected in their concept art. As you can see, they went through many different revisions that ultimately led to what we have now. Early designs for Ibushi featured a smaller jaw as well as massively inflated wind sacs on his back. Some designs have his tail as less of a hammer and more like a spear, while one makes it even resemble a trident. Other designs gave him more of an aerodynamic body, as if he was capable of gliding. The really early designs are sort of all over the place, and really make you appreciate how refined but freaky the last ones look. When they finally decided on giving Ibushi a unique jaw, it seems like they even considered having it open in multiple directions like some horror creature. Rise's director Yasunori Ichinose said that with Ibushi, they started off by figuring out how he could move in different directions and changing what part the player could access in order to make a different kind of fight compared to what we're used to. Then they got the idea to have two different serpents, based on wind and thunder. Ichinose said this was appropriate for the final boss, considering Rise's Japanese theme. He's likely referring to Raijin and Fujin, the Shinto gods of lightning and windstorms respectively, who we touched upon earlier. Shinto is a Japanese religion that dates back around 2000 years and is still widely followed today. Anyway, it seems like the Rise developers had quite a bit of trouble making Ibushi. Many members of Rise's development team discussed the challenges in bringing him to life. According to the monster production team, led by Toshihiko Kurata, they had a real hard time figuring out how to make Ibushi interact like a normal monster, since he had to be constantly floating and moving freely through the air. It took them a great amount of trial and error, but they were able to do it. In terms of the wind sacs, the lead monster modeler, Hiroyuki Konta, noted how each of Ibushi's 14 petals were designed to create a sense of elegance, and that they could be deflated individually. He also brings to attention the texture of Ibushi's skin, which was inspired by marine creatures such as whales. Speaking of whales, that's what his roars and cries are inspired by. According to sound designer Yutaka Omuta, he used synthesizer sounds over Ibushi's voice to create an inanimate and mysterious atmosphere. Ayaka Okazaki, who was the sub-lead effects artist, said she struggled with Ibushi's dragon projectiles. Because they were comprised of both dragon elements and wind, they had to reflect those attributes. In regards to Thunder Serpent Narwa, her early designs were just as crazy as Ibushi's, featuring a beak, massive thunder sacs, and curiously the same colour scheme as Zinogre, another thunder monster. Both her and Ibushi's tails were supposed to curve a lot more. One of the other early designs featured wings that she could spread out. There's even a sketch that resembles the final boss of Monster Hunter Stories 2. Ichinose said that she was designed to have a very similar silhouette to Ibushi, but also to have distinctive elements that can be seen from any angle. The monster production team noted that while Ibushi would fight like a normal monster, Narwa would be focused more on gimmicks, and so they had a hard time figuring out how to balance the floating rock platforms in conjunction with use of the wire bugs. Hiroyuki Konta wanted Narwa's skin to look more like a fish or sea anemone, with close attention paid to the tentacles in order to create a translucent appearance, similar to a jellyfish, without actually being translucent. Monster Hunter Rise does several different things to set Narwa and Ibushi apart from other monsters in the game. In the game's story, Ibushi ends up forming some kind of spiritual connection with the quest maiden Hieno, which causes her great pain, as well as to act as a conduit for his thoughts.
Where is my queen? Where is my queen?
And so she becomes able to understand him. This is known as resonance, and later, her twin sister Minato also forms the same connection with Narwa. This means that the two characters are linked to the Serpents in other places too, such as the monster introduction cinematics. In Rise, most of the cinematics are narrated by Hammon's English actor Damon Mills.
A bamboo forest at night. The sound of dancing is heard.
In Japanese, they're narrated by Kakushin Tomoyoshi, who also plays the biwa that makes up the background music for each of the scenes. According to Ichinose, he wanted to make it feel as if a villager was telling the hunter about a monster in the form of a ghost story that had been passed down. However, it differs for Ibushi and Narwa's scenes. The lead writer for Rise, Hiroshi Yamashita, said that because of Ibushi's connection with Hieno, they wanted Ibushi's intro cutscene to also be narrated by her. Same with Narwa and Minato. As such, their respective Japanese and English actresses narrate the cutscenes. For Ibushi, it's Rina Sato and Maureen Price.
I am storm incarnate. I shall wipe the land clean.
And for Narwa, it's Shizuka Ito and Heather Gonzalez.
With my elegant lightning, let us lay this land to waste.
This also extends to the Narwa the Allmother cinematic, which features both sets of actresses. What's really cool is that this also occurs with their battle music. Rise's soundtrack is unique in that it incorporates vocals into most, if not all, music tracks in the game, mostly in the form of chants or just non-lyrical. Rise will sometimes mix it up to make a monster feel distinct. For example, Rojang's theme features a singular male vocalist. Ibushi and Narwa are set apart by their songs having actual lyrics, performed in the Monster Hunter language. Hieno's singing is voiced by Izumi Kato, who sings Kimura's Song of Purification for both the title screen and village. She also performs Breath of Ire, which is Wind Serpent Ibushi's battle music. Earlier I said that the atmosphere for the first Ibushi Rampage was very different compared to normal, but it wasn't just the weather, or even Ibushi himself that created it, but the music too. It's so different compared to anything we've ever heard before, and it really sets Wind Serpent Ibushi apart as something different, unique, and dangerous. This track was composed by Satoshi Hori, who is also responsible for the themes of the Rampage, Magnamalo, Proof of a Hero, and various other tracks in Monster Hunter Rise. He hadn't previously composed for a Monster Hunter game before. The Brave Hunters theme for both hub and title screen, as well as Thunder Serpent's Narwa's theme, Lady of Lightning, are all sung by Kanai Miyazaki. Lady of Lightning was composed by Miwako Chinon, who has previously composed several of the area battle themes and Allmother's for Monster Hunter 4. And of course, both Kato and Miyazaki come together for the Allmother's theme, also composed by Satoshi Hori. The introduction of the track is around 30 seconds long, and it's so quiet and calm. The reason it's so calm is because it plays alongside Ibushi's last bow, right as he dies, and it doesn't play again when the track loops either. The rest of the track is fantastic, because it takes a much sadder, tragic, but intense tone compared to the previous ones, being Narwa's last stand. It almost sounds like a cry for help at times. Here's the kicker, Rise's lyrical tracks are also available in Japanese. The lyrics can be found in the Monster Hunter Rise art book. I myself cannot read or understand Japanese, so I looked around to find more translations and came across two sources. The first was from a YouTuber called Unit076, who transcribed the lyrics and machine translated them to serve as captions for re-uploads of Breath of Ire, Lady of Lightning, and the Allmother. The second was a GameFAQs user named KokouGaruga, who took the lyrics from a different upload of the tracks and translated them himself. Both of these were before the artbook was released. After comparing the kanji in the lyrics with that of the artbook, I can say that they were identical, so the translations are all from the same source really. So I used lyrics from both translations. It becomes very apparent that Breath of Ire is from the Kimura village's point of view. It directly references the Rampage, as well as coming together to face the pack of monsters. Lady of Lightning is a bit unclear, but it does personify Narwa's lightning to be enraged and mentions the creation of life. The Allmother's theme is almost certainly from the Serpent's point of view, with them directly talking about their children becoming the gods of heaven and earth. And then together with their descendants, eradicating the world. emphasizing that this is their idea of paradise. One thing I particularly like about the Allmother's theme is that Narwa's voice, so to speak, often takes charge, saying most of the lines, while Ibushi doesn't really get many of his own, instead saying certain words and verses in unison. Which very much symbolises their partnership. Narwa is the more important Serpent, and Ibushi is seemingly a means to an end. Rock remixes of Breath of Fire and Lady of Lightning were later released as purchasable DLC, but are also available to listen to in the Extra Tracks 2 album. Breath of Fire's rock remix is sung by Konomi Suzuki, a J-pop singer who has performed a lot of songs featured in many different anime openings. Lady of Lightning is sung by Nano, who has also performed a lot of anime openings. These remixes rule not just because they're rock, but they're sung so differently compared to the standard versions too. Sadly, they can't be enabled for when you actually fight the Serpent, and there's no Allmother remix, but they're still good. Thunder Serpent Narwa is the final boss of Rise, and Ibushi is arguably the final boss of the Rampages. As such, they play a significant role in the game's story and setting that I want to reflect on. The Rampages in Rise are caused by Ibushi and or Narwa calling out for each other. They wish to unite so they can reproduce. Narwa creates a nest and then awaits Ibushi, who seemingly rips the earth to shreds looking for her. Monster Hunter Rise has these old messages you can find in each locale that give little bits of lore. It's heavily implied that Thunder Serpent Narwa once showed up in the shrine ruins and drove away every single monster there before leaving herself. Following that, people moved in and thrived for a while, before Wind Serpent Ibushi eventually showed up with a rampage that drove the people away and once again populated the locale with monsters. The Lava Caverns records are from a researcher studying the locale quite a few decades before the events of the game. The researcher seemingly had detected rumbling in the ground that got more and more intense each day, and eventually hordes of monsters descended upon their team. The researcher had to flee and was unable to confirm whether the vibrations and rampage were related, but directed the reader to venture into the beach cave to continue their research, and that the answer should be there. Upon entering, a look at the ceiling reveals a long fossilized Thunder Serpent Narwa that seemingly died waiting for Ibushi. The events in the journal are the first known rampage to have been recorded. Narwa and Ibushi's roars drive monsters insane and cause them to try and escape, which in Rise's story leads them straight to Kamura village. In fact, the very first scene in the game has Ibushi flying behind the clouds in a very blink and you miss it moment. The Rampage relic records detail the first time Kamura village faced the Rampage. The villagers were totally unprepared, with all their defences failing, before Magnamalo showed up and dealt the final blow. Master Hamon the blacksmith drove him away, but a lot of villagers died, so they built the Red Stronghold in anticipation of another rampage, which did end up happening again in the modern day. This time, however, Apex monsters began to show up, who appeared to be monsters that were transformed and augmented by Wind Serpent Ibushi's storms, which caused them to become stronger and gain interesting abilities. If you listen to the roars of the Serpents, you can hear a sort of ringing there. These roars cannot be blocked by earplugs. What's interesting is that the Apex monsters also have this ringing in their roars. And what's more, if a monster is present in the same area, they will become enraged. So it becomes apparent that not only is this specific ringing the cause of the rampage, but Apexes can cause their own, which means that as long as Ibushi lives, they'll never truly end. Magnamalo seems immune to the whole thing, which is interesting. From the start, he's never really been scared of Narwa and Ibushi's roars, and he saw the rampage as a great opportunity to feast. In a way, this makes him something of an echo to Nergigante, the way they both take advantage of phenomena caused by a greater power in order to eat. During rampages, Magnamalo can actually take out the gate in a single hit. The Coral Palace is the final destination of the Serpents, where they meet each other and their eventual ends. As the name implies, it's surrounded by coral that appears to be long dead. Nobody really knows what this place is or what it was used for. There are long buried installations like machine guns and cannons, but like most ruins in Monster Hunter, they were likely built for repelling monsters. The still functioning Dragonator and spitting wyvern shots imply the palace was intended to face particularly big threats too, and they're facing towards the sea, so perhaps elder dragons like Sadius or even Zoromagdaros. The architectural style of the palace is very similar to that of Chimera Village, which could indicate that it was built by Chimera's ancestors or close relatives. It's likely that the Coral Palace as a whole was inspired by Ryugujo, or the Dragon Palace Castle, which was a palace located under the sea belonging to Raijin, the dragon god of the sea in Shinto. Then we look at how resonance factors into things. Ibushi resonates with Hieno, causing her to understand and repeat his thoughts as if she were possessed, which causes great pain and distress to her. Urgency is placed on defeating Ibushi for this reason, as it was feared that further contact could cause permanent damage. Following this, Minato starts resonating with Narwa, so we defeat her too, but she survives, which means both serpents are still at large, and then we're greeted to a scene where Hieno and Minato are alone in the middle of the night.
My queen, the time to converge has come. Soon our offspring shall roam across the earth. Let the storms howl and the thunder roar.
It's Narwa and Ibushi talking to each other, which is significant. Following this, Narwa and Ibushi finally unite at the Coral Palace and perform a mating dance. As mentioned earlier, Narwa goes to the caverns to lay her eggs, which combined with what we saw in the lava caverns implies that she likes to nest underground. The reason Ibushi falls rather easily is due to his injuries sustained during the Rampage. Narwa draining him is not something that always happens, it's more or less a last resort, since she knows the hunters are after her and have already beaten her once. Ibushi's blood triggers dormant wind sacs within her, allowing her to use his power too. I'm uncertain if the same is true for Ibushi and Thunder Sacs, and whether he'd be able to become the All-Father of sorts. Regardless, the Allmother quest is the only time in the series so far where we've seen a monster transform into their variant. At the end of the fight, it wasn't exactly clear what happened to the Allmother's eggs. Were they jettisoned? They're clearly not in her belly anymore. This became clear with a Sunbreak patch, which fixed a minor glitch that the expansion had introduced, with the notes casually mentioning that they exploded. I would like to take a step back and focus on the resonance aspect of this whole thing, because it is pretty fascinating to think about, especially when you factor in the scene with the twins together. Hieno could sense Ibushi's thoughts and understand what his desires were, but Ibushi must have figured out that the connection went both ways. He could sense her thoughts too. Likewise, Narwa independently realised the same thing with Minato, that she could sense her thoughts, and so Ibushi must have then clocked on that Minato was resonating with Narwa, and Narwa must have worked out that Hieno was resonating with Ibushi, and so they managed to coordinate and meet up so they could finally communicate face to face. Elder dragons are said to be intelligent, but this? I think these might be the most intelligent dragons in the series, based on feats at least, because to pull off something like this, they had to have a fairly good understanding of how people and relationships work. Enough for each serpent to realise, oh, this Wyverian sister appears to have resonated with my own counterpart, allowing my fellow serpent to speak through them. And then to exploit that is just, they're both really clever, which leads on to something else. Hieno understands Ibushi's thoughts and desires, and he understands enough about what's going on in her life to figure out that her sister Minato is resonating with Narwa specifically. So this means their connection must be very clear, and what Hieno understands of Ibushi is true. This is potentially the first time we've ever seen a monster speak English. The Monster Hunter Rise art book features a story summary, which goes into a bit more detail about the plot, and it specifically mentions that the villagers interpreted the words of Narwa and Ibushi as them wanting to take over the world, which made taking them out a top priority. And so from that standpoint, can we take everything else about them at face value? By that, I also mean the cutscene narrations and the songs, which are narrated and sung by Hieno and Minato's actresses and singers respectively. Are they really the serpents talking? And that leads to my ultimate question. Do Narwa and Ibushi want to destroy the world? And to be specific, destroy it to form what is their own idea of paradise to rule? I mean, it's laid clear, right?
I shall wipe the land clean. Let us lay this land to waste.
Tear apart the sky, rend the clouds asunder, pave the way to paradise with hurricane and thunder. The Allmother introduction only doubles down on this. You could argue that, like the other cutscenes, it's just a narration from a third party. And those scenes are, yes, that's why they're done with a literal Biwa performer, which was an instrument used to tell stories, that's what they are. But Narwa and Ibushi's scenes are specifically from their points of view, performed by Hieno and Minato's respective voice actresses. There's a distinction for that reason, especially when you factor in the Biwa's absence. Then there's the soundtrack. Their themes are the only ones in the history of Monster Hunter to have extensive written lyrics in a human language. Izumi Kato and Kanai Miyazaki are very much the singing voices of Hieno and Minato in universe, and the Allmother song is almost certainly from the perspective of the Serpents, so I do believe that it shows their true thoughts. And the lyrics are in line with what we see of everything else. They want to give birth to children and collectively destroy the world, the act of which won't matter because to them it will create paradise. And that's where the tragic tone of the Allmother's theme comes into play. Narwa the Allmother is clearly pregnant. Ibushi has given his life to power her up and she's cornered. There is definitely an element of sadness and desperation to it all. They've clearly been looking for each other for so long, and we know that other Thunder Serpent Narwas have died without ever uniting with their Ibushis. And now that these two have finally come together, they're immediately torn apart, their ambitions crushed. But ultimately, for the survival of the world, it has to end this way. We can't allow the two of them to continue living, or give birth to their children. Regardless, I do find this all quite fascinating, as it's probably the biggest display of monster intelligence we've ever seen, and has some pretty crazy implications all round. Some people scoff at the concept of resonance in the Monster Hunter universe, as if it's some anime magic thing Rise made up, but there's some evidence for it being an older lore concept that hasn't fully been elaborated on up until now. Wyverians are known for having a connection with nature, and this can be seen in Monster Hunter World with the Seeker, who is able to just sense things that are happening while investigating the Elder Crossing. But this goes back even further than that. Tutorials for the very first game have you out in the field while the Kokoto chief talks to you, except it's presented as you mysteriously hearing his voice as a guide. How is this happening exactly? He's nowhere near you. Could Wyverians just be capable of telepathy? These examples are either vague or directly between people, but there is one other potential case, a quest description from Freedom Unite. The client for this quest is a white-dressed girl. She wants you to go to the tower. Who's there? Ord Fatalis. So what's up with that then? The girl is either very insane, or could it be? I mean, with our newfound knowledge of resonance, it would certainly make sense, wouldn't it? Although I guess it raises even more questions. The point is, it's clearly not a new concept, and the idea of Narwa and Ibushi communicating their direct thoughts between the village maidens is very plausible, which has wild implications when you think about other dangerous elder dragons in the series. Now that we've taken a massive tour of Rise's Storm Serpents, it's time to go back to the Hunter's Choice. Their rankings are significant for a number of reasons. Thunder Serpent's Narwa is not only the lowest ranked Elder Dragon, but also the lowest ranked final boss. Considering Rise is, right now, the most recent and second best selling game, that's kind of crazy, isn't it? She's ranked at 210th place, tying with one of them literally being exclusive to the PSP games. Ibushi is doing slightly better at 184th place, but he's still beaten out by Cephadrome. Narwa the Allmother is significantly higher at 153rd place, behind Raknakadaki but ahead of Velocidrome. She's still arguably in the same territory as her counterparts though, since the only elders she ranked higher than are the Risen Dragons, which arguably don't really count. Ibushi is first witnessed at the beginning of High Rank and officially fought at HR6 during a rampage where he's the leader of the pack. Proof of a hero plays in the second half of the fight, and Ibushi eventually flees. Here's the thing. This was the only way to fight him at launch, through rampages, and every quest would end like this. It was impossible to actually kill him. Then we get to Narwa, who was the final HR7 boss of the game. At the end of the fight, she falls into the hole and disappears, and then we find out later that she escaped. This too was the only way to fight her at launch and means that once again, it was also impossible to kill her. So where does the Allmother factor into this? She doesn't. She was not in the game yet. Rise ended with Narwa and the Possessed Twins meeting, which was a cliffhanger. At the time, 2 big updates had been announced for the coming months, but the base game was quite bare. Narwa and Ibushi were quite literally the only Elder Dragons present and you couldn't even kill them. There was no real endgame content, no event quests or anything like that. It kind of sucked actually. Looking back, Rise 1.0 might be the worst Monster Hunter game of all time, although it didn't stay that way for long. The first update a month later gave us Elder Dragons, Koshala, Teostra and Chameleos. Woohoo! There were also extras like Layered Armour, Magnamalo in Rampages, Event Quests, and Basil Goose. And then the trailer for the second update dropped, confirming we would see a conclusion to the story, but not quite showing off the Allmother. This update dropped on the 27th of May, just over 2 months after Rise came out. Funnily enough, it was still impossible to kill Ibushi and Narwa, as the latter kills the former and then transforms into something else entirely. That remained the case until those separate event quests for them were released. So for 2 whole months, these dragons could not be killed and were very emblematic of Rise's biggest problem at the time, that it was unfinished. Narwa the Allmother not being in the game for 2 whole months also meant that the Storm Soul skill was absent from the Serpent's armor sets, meaning they were practically worthless for that entire time period. Their weapons were fine but outclassed by others, so the Serpents collectively had a fairly bad first impression, and perhaps Narwa the Allmother was seen as too little too late. At the time, a fair amount of people were hoping for a fight where you would get to battle both of the Storm Serpents simultaneously, and were disappointed at getting a souped up variant. It's also worth mentioning that the Sunbreak expansion officially becomes available when defeating Thunder Serpent Narwa at HR7. This means that newer players likely won't even finish the story, as they'll move straight onto Master Rank, skipping the Allmother entirely. Funnily enough, this means that there's a percentage of Rise players that have Malzeno as their first Elder Dragon kill. Speaking of Sunbreak, the Serpents don't have a lot of presence there. Ibushi is the MR20 boss, Narwa doesn't even show up, and Allmother is at MR30. Their gear has Storm Soul from the very beginning. But do you know what Curious Crafting is? It's an endgame augmentation method in Sunbreak that lets you randomly change the attributes of armors, adding or removing defense, elemental resistances, or even whole skills, which can allow for some absolutely bonkers sets. Well, the thing is, it doesn't add skills to Narwa or Ibushi's armor. This is likely because of Storm Soul, since those augmented skills would become part of the armor and would probably be increased by 2 more. And considering some of the skills you have access to with Curious Crafting, they could become pretty devastating. But blocking them entirely means that the Storm Soul sets become utterly useless and are eventually outclassed by everything else in the game. In Rise they were pretty damn useful, even if they weren't the best, but in Sunbreak there's literally no reason to ever use them. It's so sad. Still, surely that wouldn't be enough to make the Serpents that low, right? I mean, I suppose the fights themselves are something of an acquired taste. Ibushi was exclusive to Rampages for a long time, which is probably one of the least popular quest types I've ever seen, so much so that they didn't even return for the expansion. As a standalone fight, Ibushi is about as hard as a HR5 or 6 monster, so when you finally do those event quests, they don't make much of a challenge. Narwa is fine. Her fight heavily relies on hunting installations, which I guess some people aren't a fan of. The platforming can be a bit finicky at times, and it's worth mentioning her HR7 quest, Serpent Goddess of Thunder, is the most played quest in the entire game. It is speculated that this is because the Narwa quest was the best way to obtain materials for charm melding, so perhaps people burnt themselves out on her. Narwa the Allmother is ranked the highest of the 3, but compared to everything else she's still pretty low. I think for a lot of people, the fact that she took 2 months to release while feeling like a reskin made her a bit underwhelming. To them it was like, wow, you released a game like that, and then made us wait even longer to finish a somewhat okay story? She also released in the same update as Valstrax, so perhaps she was overshadowed slightly. Not to mention that again, her and Ibushi don't have a whole lot of a presence in Sunbreak, with Rampages gone and their gear more or less useless. I've also seen a lot of hatred for her based on the Dragonator attack. For some reason, people very much struggle with it, especially in multiplayer quests, leading to a lot of triple cuts. I also wonder if Amatsu stole a bit of their thunder, both metaphorically and literally, being the final boss to conclude Rise's story. You can argue that Amatsu was Allmother done better, especially when the guest star monster shows up. Magnamalo and the Elder Dragons get a few hits in before getting Wyvern ridden, while Apex Zinogre gets a whole bespoke turf war animation. Combined with the Serpents barely being in Sunbreak, this could have made people simply forget. Amatsu ranks at number 30, in between Dalamadeur and Dodogama? You know, up until now, I was largely speculating as to why people dislike them, and then I remembered that I can't just ask people, so I asked on Twitter and posted a poll both there and in the Monster Hunter subreddit. The results were interesting. The Twitter poll with 3 options had a very clear positive majority. However, Reddit polls allow for far more options, which let me present a broader range. As you can see, not that many people loved or hated the Serpents, and while the results lean more positive, most people seem to have milder feelings towards them, with like, dislike, and indifference being pretty high. As for written opinions on the Serpents, praise was given to their otherworldly designs, their fights for being mechanically interesting, as well as other things like the gear's functionality and designs. The themes were especially loved, particularly the Allmothers. and a lot of people love how Magnamalo shows up for the Wyvern ride. But on the other hand, others dislike their designs for being bizarre and a bit all over the place, their fights for often feeling gimmicky, and their gear for at times looking a bit ugly. A lot of people hate Resonance, their connection with the twins, I guess because Monster Hunter has always been very rooted in science. Generally, a lot of monster abilities do have some in-universe explanation, even that of the Elder Dragons. Magic has no place here. But for a lot of people, Resonance does sort of toe the line or even cross it, because there really is no way to explain it. When I discussed it earlier, I made sure to mention the other potential cases of Resonance for this reason. But regardless, that's an opinion I don't entirely disagree with and can understand. It generally seems like an aspect of the Serpents people either hate or think was poorly elaborated on. People who like and dislike the Storm Serpents also basically universally agree that they were screwed over by the release schedules. Had Narwa the Allmother been in the game from the start, they might have collectively been seen in a different light. Overall, people seem mixed on them, but leaned more towards positive. Most of the Twitter replies were praising them, with a couple of negatives. And barely anyone who commented on Reddit seemed to hate them either, most just had a mild dislike. In the Hunter's Choice, they're clearly the least popular Elder Dragons, but if people largely don't actually hate them, then how exactly does something like this happen? The vote was based on people picking their favourite monster. Zinogre ended up at number 1 because the majority of people picked him, and Steel Uragan was at the bottom because not enough people voted for him. While the Reddit poll was mixed, the people who commented there and on Twitter did seem to have an overall positive or average opinion on the Serpents. There didn't seem to be as many solid haters as you'd see with, say, Magnamalo, who ranked 50th. I know this is a very small sample size, but from my research, it just seems like people who liked or were indifferent to Ibushi, Narwa and the Allmother decided to vote for their actual favourite monster, which evidently was not any of the Storm Serpents, which resulted in the 3 placing so low, and therefore making Thunder Serpent Narwa the least liked dragon of all time. Not the most hated, but the least liked, which is an important distinction, and with votes divided across all 3 of them, it would make sense why the Allmother is barely above Velocidrone. I'm not attempting to argue that there's some secret, underground, silent majority of Narwa sleeper agents, but I do think that all 3 Storm Serpents are generally more liked than the Hunter's Choice would suggest. I want to draw attention to one comment from the Reddit poll, referring to the results. Wow, that's an almost perfect normal distribution. I think the Serpents win the most mid-elder award. Not even like mid as in bad, as all words for middling tend to become. Just mid. Perfectly mediocre. To most people they're fine. Maybe they would have done better in the Hunter's Choice if people had to pick their top 3 monsters instead of just 1, but that would overcomplicate things. Honestly, this could be a really interesting case study into why it's not always safe to draw conclusions from single choice votes. So we've talked about Wind Serpent Ibushi, Thunder Serpent Narwa, and Narwa the Allmother. Their fights, armors, weapons, concepts, music, and what people think of them. But what do I think? I think I can confidently say that Narwa the Allmother is my favourite final boss in the entire series. All 3 Serpents are pretty good to be honest. I think the very first encounter with Ibushi, like the final battle against Shigeru Magala in 4, is a genuine top 10 quest, almost entirely due to the vibes and stakes, which doesn't sound like it matters, but it's more important than you think. This is the first Elder Dragon you face, and he's unlike anyone else up until that point. The whole atmosphere of that Rampage is great as well. The same goes for his theme, it's unlike anything you've ever heard, and the way it kicks in is incredible. I also love how Rise's proof of a hero is incorporated into the fight. This specific rendition is unique compared to the others, as it feels like it was actually designed to be a boss theme. Previous proofs are good, but are often a little bit too short for my liking. For example, Try's loops in a minute, and 4's loops in even less time, so as boss themes they get quite repetitive. But Rise's proof of a hero loops around after a whopping 2 minutes and 45 seconds, so there's a lot more to the track, and it does feel really good driving back Ibushi while the theme is playing. Thunder Serpent Narwa is also good, one of the most solidly designed final bosses in the entire series. Her design and theme are great at indicating her similarities and differences to Ibushi, and the Coral Palace with her lighting is amazing. I also love how dazzling the thunder can be, and the ring attacks are great too. They sort of make for a bullet hell type of fight, where you have to constantly move around them. Normally you expect the final boss of a video game to utilise all its key mechanics as a test for what people have learnt, and Narwa incorporates both the installation scene and the rampages, but also encourages you to make use of the wire bugs in order to reach the higher up platforms that she can create. I like how her attacks are designed so that multiple weak points are exposed. It gives everyone something different to target and makes it rewarding to learn all her moves. Her ultimate attack with the spinning laser is a lot of fun too. But the Allmother fight tops it for a few reasons. The first is that while Narwa has a good moveset, she's not so difficult. Allmother dials up the aggression and combos, as well as her own unique attacks, which makes her far more engaging to me. The difficulty is perfect, and to this day she can still trip me up, even in high rank. On top of that, removing the platforming helps tighten up the fight. There's less gaps between her attacks, and so she feels more like a monster and less like a scripted boss. Her attacks are also so well designed. They're very well telegraphed and always end with some major weak point being exposed, so if you successfully dodge everything, you can immediately strike at them. This is the same for Narwa, but Allmother's fights have so little downtime that you have to be very fast. And then of course, proof of a hero playing for the second fight. I already said why I love the Rise version, but the tempo fits perfectly for the Allmother fight. There's also the Wyvern ride, which is great. Another example of a final boss incorporating the game's unique mechanics. And what's interesting is that it makes proof of a hero optional. If you like your Allmother theme, you can keep it by not initiating the mounted Punisher. Another big reason why I love the Storm Serpents is that despite being giant monsters that constantly float, they're surprisingly well done. They're very aggressive and are rarely too high above the ground for you to hit, which is a problem I have with Amatsu sometimes. A lot of giant monsters across the series are so big that most of the time you can only reliably hit their feet due to how tall they stand. The Storm Serpents, however, are floating upside down a lot, and because of how their bodies are situated, this keeps their head and arms within reach, provided you can get past their attacks. The tails too frequently become available, as do other key weak points as well, and that means you're always hitting different parts, keeping the fights nice and interesting. This is why I said Narwa is one of the best designed final bosses. She's fantastic at this, and the platforms do add a really interesting angle to everything. I just prefer the Allmother as a fight. The Serpents are fantastic. The armor on the other hand, visually I'm not the biggest fan of them, but functionally I was. I loved using their armors in Rise for how versatile they were for a good amount of the weapons in the game. It was a really fantastic take on the concept of being able to make your own set, which has been experimented with in the past. That being said, having limited curious crafting basically killed it in Sunbreak. I understand why they did it at first, the armor would have been too powerful otherwise. But by Title Update 4, it was possible to get stronger gear than what the Storm Soul sets were capable of being, especially because they'd be incompatible with mixed sets. They could have also limited the skill pool to exclude the truly game-breaking ones, or even just making it so the new skills wouldn't work with Storm Soul, but instead the sets are made obsolete, which is a massive shame. Their relatively low ranking does make me quite sad, because you can see that so much went into their creations. For Rise's final boss to end up on the same tier as Terra Shogun Senator is a genuine tragedy. As we established earlier, it largely came down to the implementation and Rise's story being a bit underbaked, leading to concepts like resonance sort of getting thrown at you without much elaboration. But they're good dragons, and I really did enjoy facing them. When I announced the series, I said it would be focused on monsters that are underappreciated. When I wrote that, I was thinking of Narwa and Ibushi. I knew they weren't that liked, but to be that low is still so mad to me, especially because they have so much going for them. But making this video has helped me gain a deeper appreciation and understanding for them, as well as why other people love or dislike them, and I can see that things are not so black and white. Thank you for watching this video, which is technically the 4th episode of Monster Hunter Compendium. This series is a lot more taxing to make compared to the Evolution videos, because they're way more dense. I would like to finish Season 1 before making any major revisions to future episodes. Remember to like and subscribe so you can catch episodes 5 to 8, which will be about a Brute Wyvern, a Leviathan, a Fanged Beast and another Elder Dragon, and be sure to check out the previous episodes too. Have a good day.